बोले सोने हाल सासवी अकाल।
My name is Mann Singh, and I'd like to welcome you to a very, very special programme today. We're actually in Leicester, the New Walk Museum, where there's been an exhibition, the Anglo Sikh Wars exhibition, Battles, Treaties and Relics, that's been running since the 11th of March. The exhibition is now coming to a close, but we're very fortunate we've got Gurinder Singh Mann, who has been the main organiser behind the exhibition, and today we're actually going to have a walking tour of all the exhibits and talk a bit about that. So just before we do that, Gurinder, how successful has the exhibition been?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. The exhibition has been absolutely fantastic. We've had a great response from people, not just from Leicester, but from all over the UK. We've even had people from abroad come over as well. So we've seen thousands of visitors come and see the exhibition. They've really enjoyed it because they've been managed to see not just what the Anglo Sikh Wars were about, but because we're actually exhibiting technology as well, it's brought many people in from all communities to see this absolutely great exhibition.
So thank you for that little starter. So I'm desperate to get in there and get the main course. So come and join us and let's see the exhibition. So here we are at the entrance to the exhibition. As you can see between us, we've got a unique exhibit, which is the not the Kohinoor, but a replica of the Kohinoor, which has been the centrepiece of the exhibition, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. As part of this exhibition, what we wanted to do is try and bring in the most pertinent relics and artifacts for this exhibition. We were lucky to actually have a replica from the Shropshire Regimental Museum, who actually loaned it to us. The reason for this special replica is the fact that this Shropshire Regiment was the ones which guarded it in the Anglo Sikh Wars just after it was actually given or taken by the British.
So मैं दर्शकों को दसना आज जो कोहिनूर हीरा जो कि महाराजा रंजीत सिंह दा जो आप क्लोज अप देख सकते हैं ये असली ओह जो ओरिजिनल सिगा हुन तां दो तीन हिस्से करते हैं पर ये असली साइज सी तां तुसी मेरा जे मैं अपना हाथ रखा पीछे करा तां तुहानू पता लग सकदा भी किड्डा वड्डा सी कोहिनूर दा हीरा मेरा ख्याल दुनिया दे विच हिस्ट्री दे विच सब तो वड्डा हीरा इस तो वड्डा कदे नहीं दिसिया सो तुसी देख सकदे आ और ये देख के भी गुरिंदर काफ़ी इमोशनस होंदे करके ये साडे सिख राज दे नाल बहुत इहदी जानी कि डूंगी लिंक है
हाँ जी the main reason ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਦੁੱਖ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ is because ਜਦੋਂ annexation ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ ਫਿਰ treaties British ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ enact ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਸੀ and those treaties essentially meant that all these spoils of war became part of the actual British collection, so to speak. But fortunately, to some extent, some of the things which may have withered away in the Punjab and Pakistan, areas, are still intact here in the UK as well.
So, जी आप हम शुरू करते हैं असल में कई बार ये भी भलेखांदा भी शायद British Army दे नाल सिखां दे नाल जंग लड़ी सी. Actually, the British Empire in the initial stages was really part of the East India Company, and this exhibition actually begins with some depiction of the East India Company. So what would you like to say about that?
I mean, essentially, what we've got to realise is that it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't about the British Raj. This is actually predates the British Raj, and essentially about the East India Company, which was just essentially that, a company. And the company was based in Leadenhall Street in London. So it's just a number of people who were actually trying to get their foothold into India and Pakistan in terms of actually going out there and actually expanding themselves in terms of what the company meant in terms of resources and things.
And the kind of commodities you see there, cotton, silk, indigo dyes, both कीमती salt and tea and spices and even opium. And actually it said that some of those spices were worth more than their weight in gold. That's how precious they were.
Absolutely. Because some of these items were only, you could only get them in the Indian subcontinent, for instance. That's why it became like a land full of riches for the British to actually go down there and,
And I think it's worth just saying that, and this is from a British source, it said that at the time the East India Company went to India in the south, when it kind of landed at the southern shores, India had 17% of the world's GDP. This is from British. So it was a really, really wealthy place. We think about it today as this poverty-stricken place, but it was a very wealthy place.
Well, that's the whole reason why I think, the British did go there, because what they did find that it was like a gold mine of resources, basically. I mean, we talk about some of the commodities you mentioned, but if India was not a rich, or the Indian subcontinent was not a rich part of the world, for instance, they would never have actually tried to expand themselves into all these different locations, as we can see on this map right now.
And of course, this image at the Bay of in Bengal with Shah Alam, it's a very powerful image, and where you see the Maharaja actually trading, and trading was very much the strategy, wasn't it, to get the foothold?
Well, absolutely, because what it was is that some of these rulers were very weak in a sense. So what the British did was, when they went there, they actually tried to enact these treaties, and the more they got themselves entrenched into India, what they did was then they were able to actually create what we call divanis. Divanis were taxation rights, basically. And Shah Alam the second was a very weak ruler in himself. So as a result, it's very easy for the British to actually obtain their objectives, basically.
Yeah. Now, as we will find out, the Punjab was annexed approximately 100 years after the British had actually got a foothold in India. But were the British East India Company trading with the Ranjit Singh, or was it? Do we know anything about the kind of relationships before the war?
Yeah, well, what we know is that just as Shah Alam had actually started undertaking these taxation rights, Baba Bagil Singh had also reached, Delhi in about just after 1780. So the British knew about the Sikhs at that particular time, but what had happened was there wasn't that much direct contact, so to speak. There was like eyeing each other up in terms of power, military strength. But it was when Maharaja Ranjit Singh entered Lahore and Amritsar 1799 onwards that the Punjab became kind of unified under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Yeah. So as a result, the British saw it as being another area which was, subject to control maybe by treaties.
Yeah. But there's some suggestion that actually Ranjit Singh was closer to the French, who at the time were not very friendly with the British, and that we know that that many of the French generals did come and support. So when did the contacts with the French begin? I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is, as we can see from this board here, we have the Sikh Empire now. So essentially, Maharaja Ranjit Singh is actually, taking control of all of Punjab, and through warfare, through kind of strategic alliances as well. So as the British have actually enacted a treaty, so, kind of in terms of the sutlej, it kind of restricted where Maharaja Ranjit Singh could go. So as a result, what they found was that just after the Napoleonic Wars, some of these soldiers were looking for employment, wanted a place to go. So once they reached the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, they were employed. So people like...
So they hired them? They were hired?
Yeah, some were mercenaries.
Were they like mercenaries, yeah?
Yes, some were actual mercenaries in a sense, but some were actually employed in such a capacity that as they grew up in the ranks, they became very much part of the Sikh Khalsa army, basically.
Yeah. Well, if we look at this depiction of a soldier at the time, there's quite a lot of Napoleonic influences there, aren't there?
Absolutely, and this is what sometimes people get confused about. They say, how come some of the actual clothing is very similar from a Western point of view? But it was basically that. As soon as the French and the Italians came in, some regiments, let me just clarify, it was only some regiments that were wearing clothing like this. I mean, obviously the Nihangs, for instance, still had their usual attire. Some of the other Sardars as well would keep their normal kind of style of wearing. But for some regiments, for instance, it was very much patterned on a Western
And what about weaponry? Were there any distinctive, I mean, we see the long rifles. Were there any particular weapons that were brought in as well by Ranjit Singh?
Well, it's interesting because the Brown Bess was kind of like one of the guns which was used by both sides, for instance. And if we look at the Thorpe as well, the cannons, for instance, now the cannons were brought in by the British, and what they did was they were actually... maybe foolishly, they were giving the patterns away to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So what Maharaja Ranjit Singh did was he set up his own factories for manufacture of guns and the manufacture of Thorpes as well. And in the end, as part of the Anglo Sikh Wars, the Sikh cannon was more effective than the British cannon.
Which is one of the things that gave them an advantage. So if we do move on now, let's begin, before we actually, again, there's a couple of items here that around, I mean, this is a headgear. Just talk us through this very intricate headgear here with velvet and gold wire and things, yeah.
Okay. So, as you know, the Sikhs wear the dastar, for instance, so, you know, it was a permanent part of their attire, being part of the 5Ks. However...
maybe we can get the camera a bit closer,
That's fine. However, what we do find is that some Khalsa used to also wear a helmet in battle as well. So, for instance, if we look at this picture of Hari Singh Nalwa at the top here, we actually see Hari Singh Nalwa wearing a helmet. And it wasn't just Hari Singh Nalwa, there were many, many others who actually wore the helmet. So what this headdress was a covering on top of the helmet. So what you could see is, if you see the hole and the gap there as well, that was for the feathers to come out as well. So it actually gave a very, very kind of great effect to the actual helmet that they were wearing.
So, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਦਸਤਾਰਾਂ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਔਰ ਹੈ ਵੀ, ਹੋਣੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੰਨਣਾ ਪਊਗਾ ਵੀ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਬਿਟ ਹੈਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਡੈਕੋਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਸੀ. Or I know in the British Museum they've got actually metal plates as well that were put underneath the turban. Because at the end of the day, you know, this was a, you know, life and death, these were battles, you had to have that advantage.
Definitely, and you know, we don't have a Akali Dastar here, but like you said, you know, the British Museum has a Akali Dastar, for instance, and it's really, really important to actually understand that there was different kind of attire, that the bana was slightly different for different Faujis as well. So in terms of which army and which regiment you were wearing different things.
We will come back to that because, you know, there is some interesting discussion to be had around the role of the Akali Nihangs as opposed to the what you could call the infantry of Ranjit Singh. But we'll talk about. But let's come to the first Anglo Sikh Wars, 1845 to 1846. So, how many months did it actually last?
Well, in terms of months, if you look at it here, we've started here in 18th December 1845, okay? And then the Battle of Sobrama takes place on the 10th of February 1846. So essentially, we're talking about a couple of months, but those couple of months were very, very intensive, because essentially, after Maharaja Ranjit Singh had passed away, there was dissension amongst the Sikh Empire, so there was assassinations as well. But at the same time, the British were eyeing up the territory because they knew that there was, you know, kind of discord in the Sikh camp. So as a result, the British started increasing their Fauj around the Punjab. So then...
Well, so the Battle of Mudki was the first one, but just give us some sense of the kind of numbers we're talking about in terms of soldiers and weaponry, you know, and cannons and things like that, horsemen.
Well, the numbers actually vary, and, you know, the problem was that even though the Lahore Darbar had thousands and thousands of people ready to fight, they only sent a number of thousands to actually fight in the end, basically. And Gulab Singh, in his Kashmir, for instance, they didn't take part either. Now, if we look at the River Sutlej, there was also the Patiala states, the Fulkian states as we call them, yeah, they did not take part in the Anglo Sikh Wars as well. So really, if we were to combine all the Sikh forces, and if they had cut, as we say, there would have been a bigger difference in terms of the outcome. But in terms of the weapons that we use, we can see some images here. We've got the Sikh cannons here, as you can see in this particular battle here. But the key people who were involved in this the original first Anglo Sikh Wars were Lal Singh and Tej Singh.
And they were seen as treacherous. They'd actually... in fact, they were operating for the British. That's what it's said.
Unfortunately, what we've found is that maybe even at the time, people didn't know this. It was maybe some months later, Lal Singh and Tej Singh were actually applying, were giving state secrets away to the British. They were actually providing information. They were kind of providing battle plans as well. So therefore, Lord Gough and Henry Hardinge on the British side were able to receive this information. It made the battle so much easier for the British. In a way, it was almost like a foregone conclusion, almost, that the British were going to win. But that's not entirely the case, because when we get to the Battle of Ferozshah...
Well, just before that, because I think it is significant that that first skirmish, there was a real fear by the British that they would lose. So, for example, Sir Hope Grant, here a quote from me, says, "Truly the night was one of gloom and foreboding, and perhaps never in the annals of warfare has a British army on so large a scale been near to a defeat which would have involved annihilation." So that was a pivotal moment. I mean, if the British had lost there, they could have lost the empire. I mean,
the Battle of Ferozshah is probably one of the key battles that every Sikh should know about. Okay, we should know about the Anglo Sikh Wars anyway, but the Battle of Ferozshah on the 21st of December, the British were on the verge of defeat. Okay. So Henry Hardinge was sent his papers away for burning. He sent his sword away as well. They were really thinking that it's all over. Unfortunately, the treacherous commanders withdrew their forces.
So what was the advantage that the Sikhs had in that battle? What was it? Was it the weaponry? What the cannons? What was it?
It was a combination of both, basically. The cannons actually worked really well for the first two battles. The British actually hadn't really kind of got a major plan as to what they were going to do. So they were using a different strategy compared to the Sikhs. So therefore, the Sikhs, on the first day of the Battle of Ferozshah, had gained this clear advantage. But unfortunately, like I said, due to the fact that there was a treacherous people in our midst, we were unable to kind of fulfill the mission that we
So the British withdraw and regroup, and then if we come approximately a month later, 21st of January, we have Buddhawal and Aliwal. And again, this is where they actually, by now, they've got people, Lal Singh, that's working for them, yeah? So tell us about this battle.
Okay, now this is very interesting because what we have now is we have another Sikh commander involved here, Ranjit Singh Majithia. Ranjit Singh Majithia takes place, is the commander at Buddhawal. So what happens at Buddhawal is that he attacks the baggage train of Harry Smith, and he's successful, which cuts their supply line. So he's successful, but unfortunately he doesn't pursue the British any further. So what that does, it gives a couple more days respite for the British, and unfortunately at Aliwal, the British had a better success at this battle. But what we do see in this picture, if je aapa picture aap dekhiye, jehड़ा lance jehड़ा घोड़िया ने जिदा हाथ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ, we can see that above your head, for instance.
ਅਸਲੀ ਬਰਸ਼ੇ same scale ਤੇ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਉਸ battle ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀਗੇ, ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਇਹ ਇਸ about 8 ਫੁੱਟ ਹੋਣਾ।
8 ਫੁੱਟ ਦਾ ਡੈਫੀਨਿਟਲੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ। ਨਾਲੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਚੀਜ਼ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਬੈਟਲ ਤੋਂ, ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੈਪ ਆ,
ਟੋਪੀ ਵੀ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
From the British side, this topi was what they wore in the Battle of Aliwal as well. We are very lucky that a museum in Nottingham has this right now.
So is this a battle headgear, or would be ceremonial?
Well, it's not ceremonial. This is actually from the actual battle itself.
Made out of leather.
It's made out of leather, and it's got this kind of strap as well, which would have strapped the person's.
So ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆਹ same ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਸਿਰ ਤੇ ਟੋਪੀਆਂ ਰੱਖੀਆਂ। ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਨੋਟ ਕਰਨ ਵਾਲੀ ਆ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਰਾਣੀ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਕੌਰ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਰੋਲੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹ ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਵੀ ਉਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਅਟਾਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਜ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਨੇ 10 ਘੋੜਸਵਾਰ ਭੇਜੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਦੱਸੋ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਠੀਕ ਆ। ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਲਾਸਟ skirmish ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਅਲੀਵਾਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, we get to the Battle of Sobrama. Battle of Sobrama ਜਿਹਦਾ final battle ਸੀਗਾ Anglo Sikh Wars, ਪਹਿਲੀ Anglo Sikh War ਵਾਸਤੇ। So ਮਹਾਰਾਣੀ ਜਿੰਦਨ ਕੌਰ ਨੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ instruction ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਅਟਾਰੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਹਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ, ਬਹੁਤ ਮਹਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਸਾਡਾ ਆ, ਉਹਦਾ ਕਮਾਂਡ ਦੇ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ 올ਡਰ ਗਾਰਡ ਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਭਲਾਮਾਨਸ ਬੰਦੇ, you need to go into battle. He rounds up ਅਕਾਲੀ ਹਨੂਮਾਨ ਸਿੰਘ as well. So ਨਿਹੰਗ ਸਿੰਘ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੋਰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਭਰਤੀ ਹੋ ਕੇ
ਹੌਸਲਾ ਵੱਧ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦਾ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਹਾਂਜੀ। ਫਿਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦੇਖੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬੜੇ ਬੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਬੈਟਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਤਾਂ ਅਨਫੋਰਚੂਨੇਟਲੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਸਿੰਘ ਤਾਂ ਤਿਆਰ ਸੀਗਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਮੰਨਣ ਨੂੰ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਟ ਕਰਨ, ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਕ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ।
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਗੁਰਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ, ਇੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕੋਟ ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਇਸ ਜਨਰਲ ਸਰ ਜੋਸਫ ਠੱਕੇਵਾਲ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਨਾ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਸਿੱਖ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਹਿੱਕ ਟੁੱਟ ਗਈ ਸੀ, ਹਾਰ ਗਏ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹ ਕਦੇ ਭੱਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਆਖਰ ਦੀ ਦਮ ਤੱਕ ਲੜਦੇ ਰਹੇ। ਔਰ ਮੈਂ ਕਈ ਆਪ ਖੁਦ ਇਹ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਦੀਆਂ ਮੈਂ ਝਲਕੀਆਂ ਆਪ ਦੇਖੀਆਂ ਇਸ ਸਰਦਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ।
ਠੀਕ ਆ। Now, he wasn't the only person. ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹਾਰਡਿੰਜ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਆ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਟ੍ਰੈਚਰੀ ਨੇ ਖਰਾਬ ਕੀਤਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ। ਆਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਤਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੌਸਲੇ ਵਾਲੇ ਬੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਕਾਫੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵੋਰਫੇਅਰ ਬੈਟਲਸ ਪਲਾਨਸ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸੋਹਣੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਇਹ ਬਸ ਸਾਡੇ ਟ੍ਰੈਚਰਸ ਬੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ।
ਇੱਕ ਕਹਾਵਤ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਇਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੋਂ ਹੀ ਪ੍ਰਚਲਿਤ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ, ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਮਾਰੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਦੇ ਨਾ ਹਾਰੇ। ਇਹ ਉਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ, ਚਲੋ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਤਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆ, ਪਰ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਲੈਸਨ ਫਰਮ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਸਿੱਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਰਾਜ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ, ਇਹ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਰਾਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਤੇ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਏਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਕੌਮ ਆ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਤਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਫਾਈਨਲ ਬੈਟਲ ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਰੀਚ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ, ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਮਾਝੇ ਮੂਵ ਇਧਰ ਨੂੰ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਨੇ ਟ੍ਰੀਟੀਜ਼ ਇਨੈਕਟ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ। ਸੋ ਵੀ ਕਾਲ them the battles as part of this project, we call it Anglo Sikh Wars battles, treaties and relics. So these treaties tell you that on the 11th of March
ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਧੀਆਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਮਝੌਤੇ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ। ਉਦਾਂ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੰਪਲੀਟ ਐਨੈਕਸੇਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦਾ, it was a loose governmental rule basically, that Treaty of Baroval ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ enact ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ at this particular time.
ਸੋ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਨੀਤੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਲੜਨਾ ਵੀ ਦੂਜੇ ਪਾਸੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਗੋਸ਼ਟੀ ਵੀ ਰੱਖਣੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਦੀ ਨੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਰਹੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ you can break a few people off, you can put some people into doubt, you can buy a few people off as well, yeah? But let's have a look at this exhibition. You've got some actual drawings, original drawings of the battle scenes themselves, the strategic plans that some of the generals actually used, yeah?
So we've got this from the Mercian Regiment in Worcester. So the Regimental Museum in Worcester, they took part in the actual, the Worcester Regiment took part in the battle as well. So what we see here is, we see a generic plan of Punjab, which is showing the battle areas as well. The one here on the left is the Battle of Sabrama, the one we've just talked about, and it shows you the Sikh positions. So this one, we have the Battle of Sabrama, which actually shows the British lines, but also shows the Sikh lines as well. So this was actual hand-drawn, has been kept intact for so many years as well. And it's absolutely fantastic that, you know, we're able to see these things even now, so many years later.
और ये भी सन जाने के लेसन में भी बड़ी प्लानिंग सगी और एमी नहीं सगा क्योंकि ब्रिटिश in अक्सर और दुनिया काफी राज कायम कर लसी they had some of that military expertise and in fact some people are saying that they underestimated the Sikhs. They thought these are just kind of tribesmen, you know, we'll come in and we'll just run them over, but they were shocked about the organisation of Ranjit Singh's army, and that, well, it wasn't Ranjit Singh's army at the time because he'd gone, but the fact that there was organisation, although we did crumble afterwards, that was significant, wasn't it?
Absolutely. If we did not have a well-organised and well-oiled army, then we would not have even got to the state we did, basically. Yeah. We've talked about the factors which has led to our demise, but what we have to really talk about is the horsla that the Sikhs had as part of these battles. They were willing to meet Shahidi, for instance. Their hostile never went, basically. They were always willing to die for the faith.
So, if we come in now to the Second Anglo Sikh War, so this was 1848 to 1849. Again, roughly how long did that last? Was it a matter of weeks or months?
Well, basically, again, there's two aspects to this war. We've got the Siege of Multan, which took place from April to January, so that's roughly about 8 months or so, give or take. And then we've also got 3 other battles taking place, which ends in February.
So let's just walk us through that kind of period then. So the Multan is 19th of April to 22nd of January. That's quite a long period.
Many months, basically. So what's happened...
So ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੁਲਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਜੋ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਘੇਰਾ ਪਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਸੰਗਤੋ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 8-9 ਮਹੀਨੇ ਘੇਰਾ ਪਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ
So Diwan Mulraj ਜਿਹੜਾ ruler ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹ time ਤੇ he had to pay some taxation to the British, but what happened was as 2 of the Britishers were leaving the actual fort, they were killed. So as a result of that, the British then sent a Fauj to actually to Kairabata Multan, so they could actually start a war, basically. But because this was becoming troublesome for the Sikhs called their own war as well. So the call to war with the British, this was posted on the actual gates of Harmandir Sahib. The Harmandir Sahib de bar e jidan order laga hoya, itthe likhya hoya Jindan Kaur da jidan sada she's been banished. ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰੇ Raja Sher Singh ਦੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ as a Fauj, and we should all collate ourselves forces together to fight against the British. So the siege is now on, and then we turn to the Battle of Ramnagar.
So ਇਹ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੱਕ ਕਿਸਮ ਦਾ ਸਰਬਤ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵੀ ਬੁਲਾਇਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ ਉਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੇ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਹੁਕਮ ਜਾਰੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਦੇ ਹੁਕਮ ਜਾਰੀ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਓ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜੂਝੋ ਸੋ the institutions were still there, they hadn't disappeared ਉਸ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੇ ਹਜੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਅਕਾਲ ਤਖਤ ਹਜੇ ਆਪੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਥ 'ਚ ਬੱਚੀ ਸੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ when British have actually taken over institutions, what you still got to remember is the actual Faujan was still under Sikh control in a sense, so therefore the edicts would be there. It was more a case of this particular treaty which had been acted was only stable for a certain point. Once they see other things taking place, the treaty would be broken.
So by November, 22nd of November 1848, there's the Battle of Ramnagar. So tell us about this one.
So basically, as this siege is taking place in Multan, the second theatre of war is taking place at Ramnagar. So Sher Singh is the Sikh the leader at this particular point.
So there is a scene here of the actual battle by Henry Martins is
yes, so Henry Martins took a number of Henry Martins took a number of depictions of these battles, and that's why his are very, very popular. But what this happened was, in this particular battle, what we realized is that the British sword against the Sikh talwar was witnessed in the battle, but it was far weaker. Again, we talk about the Sikh weapons being far superior to the British. So after Ramnagar, there was a further skirmish.
So that would have been partly to do with the technology of the metal itself, and it was a particular type of technique that had been nurtured over the centuries, wasn't it, to make that metal?
Absolutely. Since the time the Sikhs had become Khalsa and had actually been instrumental in terms of actually forging the weapons, for instance. Even at the time of Guru Gobind Singh, the weapons that were created at Anandpur Sahib, for instance, as well, were very, very highly superior. So as you can see, they developed...
There was like, they said that Damascus steel...
Damascus steel and all those kind of other factors which led to the strengthening and the toughening of the metals, so to speak. But it just shows you that, you know, the British are acknowledging the weapons being far superior.
I think it's really important to know that in the history of warfare, the victors have always been the ones that have had the superior weaponry. And therefore, you know, we often talk about the frontline infantry soldiers, but the people behind the scenes, and, you know, the Siklikars, for example. I'll just say Siklikar and Uppala, but just Siklikar na hunde ta sadiyan koi bhi janga juda nahi honi, because they are the ones that were both making the weapons but perfecting and developing those techniques.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਦੇਖੋ ਸਾਰੇ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲਸ ਹੋਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਲਗਾਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ
ਅੱਜ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਭਲਾਈ ਦਿੱਤੇ ਹੋ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਦੇਖੋ ਹੁਣ ਕੋਈ ਬੋਦਰ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਰਿਸਪੈਕਟ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਇਹ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ they were very very fundamental and instrumental to all the Sikh war efforts.
And it said that, I don't know, but for every infantry soldier there would be hundreds of people behind the scenes procuring weaponry, making it. So, ਆਪਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖਲੀ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਥੋੜੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾ I don't know what the actual is, but ਕਈ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਲੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਿਲੀਅਨਸ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੰਦੇੜ ਵੱਲ ਵੀ ਜਾਈਏ ਪਟਨਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵੀ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਮਹਾਰਾਸ਼ਟਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜੇ ਇਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨੂੰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਯਾਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਯਾਦ ਕਰੀਏ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਪੀੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਜੁੜੀਆਂ
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਐਬਸੋਲੂਟਲੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਕਾਟ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਮਟਾਈਮਸ ਆਪਾਂ ਰਿਸਪੈਕਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਡੇ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨਾਲ ਕੌਮ ਲਈ ਕੀਤਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ we should respect our institutions and we should respect the people who have come before us as well.
So ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਚਿਲੀਆਂ ਵਾਲਾ battle ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ 13 ਜਨਵਰੀ 1814 ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ battle ਸੀਗੀ
ਠੀਕ ਆ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ battle of Firozshah ਜਿੱਦਾਂ Gore was on the verge of defeat Jallianwala was almost a similar battle to Firozshah. It was fought at the same place where Alexander the Great fought King Porus in 326 BC. So what we find is the British are again in a precarious position basically. So Sikhs are using their snipers. The British are taking a very heavy toll basically at this time. But again, what's happened is once this battle finishes, there's dispersion.
Just what about the numbers? You give us scale, you know, horses, infantry, cannons. What are we talking about here?
I mean, we're talking about at least 20, 30,000 at least on each side basically fighting here, you see. So what we have is the Sikhs are fighting as best as possible and almost to the fact that where the British are actually, again, their losses are mounting up, basically.
Yeah,
so the reason we know the losses are mounting up, because in Parliament, they're debating whether Lord Gough, who's the commander in charge at the time, should be replaced. So that's how much mounting of British losses we're finding.
Well, I'm just going to read this because I think this gives you a sense of the kind of the ferocious, battle that was taking place. The British launched their attack with their artillery advance to an open space in front of Chiliwala and opened fire on the Sikh artillery. The assault was led by Brigadier Pennyquick and Colonel Brooks, who both died in the assault. So ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਕਮਾਲ ਦੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਦੋ ਜਨਰਲ ਸੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਜੰਗ ਉਹ ਦੋ ਹੀ ਮਾਰੇ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ you can tell what the response was. The regiment colours, the focus of the regimental pride and symbol of their allegiance to the Queen, was lost in the battlefield. The Sikhs began their hit-and-run tactics, snipers taking a heavy toll on the British cavalry and infantry. 4 British guns and the colours of the 3 British regiments fell to the Sikhs, and the British registered nearly 3,000 dead and wounded in the air. So this was ferocious.
Absolutely ferocious, because what the British didn't want to do was, when they started, they thought, like you said, it was going to be a very, very easy battle. It was a walkover. But as the losses kept on mounting up for the British, they were in a very precarious position.
So what went wrong then? Because, in a sense, we were an advantage there, and then again
So what's happened now is that it's interesting, because we talked about the Battle of Multan, for instance. The Battle of Multan finishes now.
Yeah.
So after this particular point here, the Battle of Multan finishes. So what the British are doing now, they've sent every cannon, every person they have at their disposal to reach Gujarat. And this, what happens now is that the British have got more superior strength in numbers now. So when we get to the Battle of Gujarat, Raja Sher Singh, unfortunately, does not have the capacity or the numbers to actually fight or be successful at this particular battle. And unfortunately, we get to the stage where the British do win this final encounter against the Sikhs. But we know Lord Dalhousie is actually stating the Sikhs displayed their skill, courage and activity which belonged to their race. So it was no walkover for the British.
And ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨੂੰ ਪਰਖਣਾ, you have to have artifacts. ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ oral traditions, ਉਹ ਵੀ important ਆ, but to triangulate you have to have artifacts. And we have artifacts. So ਇੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਚਿਲਿਆਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਬੈਟਲ ਸੀਨ ਤੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਸਿੱਖ ਦੇ, ਸੋ ਇਹ ਉਰਦੂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਲਿਖਿਆ. Do we know what it says on that letter?
No, we don't. We've not had this translated, but quite a few relics and artifacts were taken from the battle, as you're aware, some which we've exhibited here in this exhibition.
So this is ongoing kind of work that we need to do. We have a lot of important documents that haven't really seen the light of day as well, and we will show you another piece that came out that was an absolute amazing finding, but we will come back to that later. So we've got to, so how does this end then?
Okay, so what actually happens is the Sikhs retreat, and then at this particular point, the British and the Sikhs then kind of talk to each other in terms of a camp, and then at Rawalpindi is where the actual Sikhs go and deliver.
That's the 11th of March,
just after
1849,
just after the 11th of March. Yeah. They get to Rawalpindi, and the Sikhs actually deliver their weapons in a heap to the British. So that is at that particular point, if you look at the 11th of March, we look behind you, and the 27th of March, 1849, is when the Punjab is officially annexed by the East India Company, and that's when we officially lose our Sikh Raj.
Yeah. So ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ 27 ਮਾਰਚ ਨੂੰ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ 11 ਮਾਰਚ ਬੈਟਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਖਰੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹ ਗੁਜਰਾਤ ਦੀ ਬੈਟਲ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗੌਫ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜਨਰਲ ਸੀ ਉਹਨੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਸੰਭਾਲ ਲਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ. ਲਾਰਡ ਡਲਹਾਊਜ਼ੀ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਦਿਖਾਈ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੌਮ ਆ ਇਹ ਜੰਮੀ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆ ਇੰਨੀ ਸੀਗੀ. ਪਰ ਫਿਰ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਫਿਰ ਲਾਹੌਰ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕਬਜ਼ਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਂ ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਕੀਤਾ, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ.
ਵੈਲ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਉਦਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਮੀਨਿੰਗ ਉਹਦਾ ਮੈਨਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਟ੍ਰੀਟੀਜ਼ ਇਨੈਕਟ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ. ਉਦਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬੱਚਾ
ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ
ਉਹ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ? ਸੋ ਵੀ ਹੈਡ ਅ ਰੀਜੈਂਸੀ, ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਲਾਹੌਰ ਦਰਬਾਰ ਸੀਗਾ they were enacting on behalf of Maharaja Dalip Singh. Maharaja Jindan Kaur ਤਾਂ ਬੈਨਿਸ਼ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਸੀਗੀ before that, so even when we get
ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਨੇਪਾਲ ਤੇ ਐਕਸਾਈਲ ਕਰ
ਸ਼ੇਖਪੁਰਾ ਫੋਰਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬੈਨਿਸ਼ ਜਿਹਾ ਕਰਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ. But Maharaja Dalip Singh was in no official position to be signing any treaty because he was just a minor. So that treaty is always understood to be maybe not as binding as one would actually think.
So ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਾਈਲ ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੈ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ. ਇਜ਼ ਅ ਯੰਗ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਾਂ ਸੀਗੀ ਬਹਾਦਰਨੀ ਸੀਗੀ, ਇਹਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਾਈਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਪਿਆ. ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਨੇਪਾਲ ਦਾ, ਉਹਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਰਨ ਦਿੱਤੀ. ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਤੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇਪਾਲੀਜ਼ ਲੋਕ ਆ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਹਮਦਰਦੀ ਦਿਖਾਉਂਦੇ. ਔਰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਕਮਾਲ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਸ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਫੀ ਵਸਦੇ ਰਹੇ, ਉੱਥੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵਸਦੀ ਸੀ. ਉਹ ਵੀ ਭੈੜੀ ਹਾਲਤ ਆ, ਉਹਨੇ ਦੇਖਭਾਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ. ਸੋ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਮਹਾਰਾਣੀ ਦਾ ਕਿੰਨਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਗਈ ਸੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਲੋਕੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੱਜ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ. ਹਾਂਜੀ,
ਇਹ ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਇਫੈਕਟ ਸੀਗਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਉੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੇ. ਉਹ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ, ਇਫੈਕਟ ਕੀ ਕਰਦੇ. ਲੋਕਲ ਪੋਪੂਲਸ ਬਹੁਤ ਲਾਈਕ ਕਰਦੇ
ਦੇਖਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਲੋਕ ਆ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਏਡੀ ਵੱਡੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਰਾਜ ਨੂੰ ਦਾ ਟਾਕਰਾ ਕੀਤਾ. ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਨਰਲ ਜੋਰਾਵਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਸੀਗੇ, ਕਸ਼ਮੀਰ ਦੇ ਜਨਰਲ ਸੀ, ਔਰ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਕਸ਼ਮੀਰ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਜਨਰਲ ਜੋਰਾਵਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀਆਂ ਸਿਫਤਾਂ ਗਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ. ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਉਹ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਕੇ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ.
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਇਹ ਜ਼ੋਰਾਵਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖੋ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੀਏ ਹਰੀ ਸਿੰਘ ਨਾਲਵਾ ਦੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੀਵੀਅਸਲੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ, ਅਕਾਲੀ ਫੂਲਾ ਸਿੰਘ, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਈਵਨ ਦੋ ਦੇ ਵਰ ਫਾਈਟਿੰਗ ਅਗੇਂਸਟ ਦੀ ਅਫਗਾਨਸ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਫਗਾਨਸ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਐਕਨੋਲੇਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਨਰਲ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਇੰਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹੇ ਲਿਖੇ ਵੀ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਜਾਂ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਵੈਰੀ ਸਟ੍ਰੈਟੇਜਿਕਲੀ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੇ, ਉਹ ਸਟਿਲ ਰਿਸਪੈਕਟ ਦੇਣਾ ਪੈਂਦਾ.
ਸੋ ਇਹ ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਝਲਕੀਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਦੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਐਂਗਲੋ ਸਿੱਖ ਵਾਰਸ, ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਲਾਹੌਰ ਦੀ ਟ੍ਰੀਟੀ ਹੋਈ. ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਸੀਗੇ ਪੁਰਾਤਨ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਔਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਲਈ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਤਰੀਕਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ 3D ਐਨੀਮੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਸਕਰੀਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਤਿਆਰ ਕੀਤੇ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਿ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਚੀਜ਼। ਸੋ ਆਓ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। So far we've talked to you through some of the historical battles and the final kind of treaty. But we're going to now show you some of the weaponry and some of the artifacts. But we're going to show you with a difference. We're actually going to show them 3D. So Gurinder Singh, just tell us something about this part of the exhibition.
Well, what we wanted to do is we wanted to make this exhibition slightly different from anything in the past. So as a result, the Sikh Museum Initiative has been investing in technology which allows us to see our exhibits and artifacts in a different way. So what we see here, cleverly designed by Taranjit Singh on behalf of the Sikh Museum Initiative, is a number of objects which have been scaled and recreated in 3D, so we can actually see what they look like.
So that's the original Kohinoor, isn't it?
Well, the Kohinoor,
that was worn on Ranjit Singh's arm.
Absolutely. In 1851, this is exactly what you would have seen the Kohinoor in its present state. This actual embroidery, etc., is all now still kept at the Royal Collection. But what we do see is how fascinating it is in its actually glory at that particular time. So that is the technology we can do or use to actually show what artifacts are
Just
all
on
about.
this one, but, you know, we've got the Kohinoor in the centrepiece, but we've got to, again, huge diamonds on the center. Do we know anything about these two diamonds?
Information about that is very sparse. I think it's more a case that they were just taken and then kind of left to the kind of side, basically.
What tells us the Tosha Khana of the Lord the Bar? What was the scale of the Tosha Khana that the British did, raid?
The Lahore Tosha Khana was so huge, so immense, so, what's the word to actually, so qeemti, we can't even describe it. We talk about the Kohinoor, which was just one object. We had shawls, we had rubies, we had weapons, we had every single thing you can think of in terms of a state, in terms of a state. However, there was more than one Tosh Khana. While we had the Tosh Khana in Lahore, there was another Tosh Khana in Amritsar as well, near Rambagh, for instance, and even that was a big treasury which the Sikhs actually had. So moving on now, we can actually look at a couple of other things that we've 3D modelled as well. Now, this is only one Sikh flag, which was actually captured as part of the Anglo Sikh Wars. So what we can see...
this would have been one of the Nihang...
no, this was not one of the Nihangs one. No, this was not the Nihang one. This was actually by another regiment, which we're not 100% sure who would have actually carried that. But there's two of these which were actually found in Britain. One of these is actually kept or was on display at Lichfield Cathedral, which is just down the road as well.
But just on that, there's an interesting, the actual motif. Do you know what the motif is on the flag?
Well, there's two. Well, one is the actual about the sunburst, and on the other side is of a Hindu kind of god as well. So we don't know whether it was actually a Khalsa regiment which actually had this, or whether it was some of the Hindus who were fighting.
The Rajputs and others as well.
It could have been so, but because there's more than one, it's significant, so to speak. So moving on, we can actually see also a Sikh helmet being done.
Yeah. And we mentioned this earlier on as well about the actually metal helmets that were worn.
Absolutely. And if you can see the kind of kadai that
and
was...
the chainmail on this as well.
Yeah, there's chainmail which was actually created, but actually if you see the actual decorative parts as well, there's a number of these kind of exhibits which can be seen here all across the UK as well. So this is really a fascinating piece, but what I really want to show you, importantly, is this sword here. Now, whilst this is a British sword, it's got a fascinating history. It actually belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte. So this actually came from the Napoleonic Wars. It was then given to Henry Hardinge, and this is the same sword he sent for safekeeping at the Battle of Ferozshah. So it has a great history, and it was eventually sold to a private collector. One of the other things that we actually 3D modelled is something not directly related to the Anglo Sikh Wars, but is the beti, or what we call jarena. Jarena means 4 mirrors in Persian. And essentially we have...
This would be the armour that Guru Gobind Singh Ji would have worn. Was this Guru Gobind Singh Ji's actual depiction of that armour?
It's an actual depiction, because the actual real armour is actually kept with Captain Amarinder Singh in Patiala. So based on photography that we've taken, it actually shows you the Gurbani, which has actually been shown on these particular plates as well. Yeah. So this was a fascinating thing which we wanted to actually do as well.
So actually, if we look at that, there's various, if we can... Gurbani, ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਵੀ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਹੋਰ
So we've got Jap Sahib, Japji Sahib, so that's the kind of pattern that we've got the Bani on.
ਏਕ ਓਂਕਾਰ ਸਤਿਨਾਮ ਸਤਿਗੁਰ ਨਿਰਭਉ ਨਿਰਵੈਰ ਅਕਾਲ ਮੂਰਤਿ. So you can see here that the power of Bani in inspiring both the kind of you could say the armour, the dress, but also it's very important that on their lips. I mean, this is Guru Gobind Singh Ji, but the Sikhs always had Satnam Vaheguru, Jakare. The psychological
Absolutely.
aspect was important.
That's why when you see even other decorative,
The Chakra. Yeah.
this is a chakra. This is a kind of patterned on one which is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, for instance. Again, Gurbani on the weapons, on the shastras, played an important role in terms of what.
Well, it देखो शब्द क्योंकि टुकदा शब्द है गुर का शब्द रखवारे चौकी जाओ गिरद हमारे राम नाम जन लागा जम न जाए कर वर्पागा. So क्योंकि चौकी जाओ गिरद हमारे गुर का शब्द रखवारे. So that's why it fits with the chakra. It's the shabad is
Absolutely, Hanji, because the Gurbani is actually now being employed onto weaponry, but it's done in a skillful way. It's not just done willy-nilly. There's an actual kind of cosmos kind of thinking behind this in where Gurbani fits in with the shastras.
Again, this is creating the kind of power, the spirit, the kind of raising the spirits. You can imagine if you're down in numbers, then that can make all the difference in terms of keeping on fighting.
It can make the absolute difference, because we'll talk about Gurbani and the manuscripts in a second, but actually the Gurbani on the Shastras is a fundamental part of what the Sikhs were about, because the Shastras, they were elevated by Guru Gobind Singh to the status of Rab. So,
Guru Maharaj कहते आस कृपान खंडो खड़ तुपक तबर तीर सहब सरोई सेती ये है हमारे पीर क्योंकि इस करके पीर किया गया करके इन्हां शक्ति आ इन्हां पावर आ इन्हां जमन मरण की गल हैगी आ सो ये थोड़ी चल कि आपां हुण अगे होर भी तुहानूं टेक्निकल जिहड़े इन्हां ने बनाए एग्जीबिशन दिखाते हैं सो अज दे जो आपां टूर सो फार आपां जो एंग्लो सिख वॉर दे बारे भी गल कीती ट्रीटी दी गल कीती आपां तुहानूं कुछ शस्त्र भी दिखाया ਹੁਣ ਗੁਰਿੰਦਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਆਫਟਰ ਮਾਸ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕੁਝ ਆਹ ਜੋ ਪਿਕਚਰ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਨ ਦੀ ਆਫਟਰ ਮਾਸ ਦ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਰੈਕਗਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਮਾਰਸ਼ਲ ਕੌਮ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੁਸ਼ਮਣੀ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਭਰਤੀ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਸੀ ਲਾਰਜ ਨੰਬਰ ਇਨ ਦ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਆਰਮੀ 40% ਕਿਹਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਆਰਮੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀਗੇ.
So after annexation, what we find is that there were many numbers of Sikhs which were actually employed by the British Army. Because firstly, they were soldiers, so they had no other employment. But secondly, the British actually put them in strategic places to actually fight battles as well. So as a result, we have the Battle of Saraguri, which is 1897. It's a bit later than the Anglo Sikh Wars, but it's a fundamental battle that the Sikhs fought, defending the British Empire, so to speak, against the Afghans, for instance. But it's only a matter of time, because at that particular point in 1914, the Sikhs accounted for less than 2% of the population of India, but were 22% of the Indian army. Just shows you the numbers which were employed by the British for World War I and World War II.
I'm not sure what the source is, but I've also read that at one point up to 40%. So what was it about the Sikhs that, that the British, that were drawn into the British army? I mean, there will be push and pull factors. The first thing is that they had a ready fighting force. These people have been fighting for a long time. But also there's something about bringing them into the empire because of they knew what they were about.
Yeah. Well, we know that the British had, looking at their accounts, they know that the Sikhs are a martial race. They've already seen them fight in the Anglo Sikh Wars, and in a way, they don't want them to actually have them as an adversary. They want them to actually be on side. So that's why employment takes place literally after the Anglo Sikh Wars, and that's why they're employed and on many of the campaigns that the British actually do as part of the Indian Army. So Saraguri is a very key point in time, for instance, which shows how much the actual effect that the Sikh soldiers had fighting for the British.
But the British also, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੋ ਪੱਖ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਈਕੋਲੋਜੀਕਲ ਸਟ੍ਰੈਟਜੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਭਰਤੀ ਕੀਤੇ ਸੀ ਸੋਲਜਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਛਕਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਵੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਔਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਆਹ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਟਾਈਗ੍ਰਿਸ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਮੈਸੋਪੋਟੇਮੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਪੀੜ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਨਾਲ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਫਰਾਂਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਬੈਠੇ ਪਾਠ ਕਰਦੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਔਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਫੈਸਿਲਿਟੇਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਥੋੜੇ ਰਸਮ ਰਿਵਾਜ ਵਗੈਰਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੂਰੇ ਪ੍ਰਫੁੱਲਤ ਕਰਨੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ
ਇਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਟ੍ਰੈਟਜੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਨਸ਼ੋਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੇ ਭਰਤੀ ਹੋਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਦੇ 5Ks ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮੇਕ ਸ਼ੋਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਨਿਤਨੇਮ ਵੀ ਕਰੋ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਰੱਖੋ ਤਾਂ to make sure that they were very disciplined ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਡਿਸਪਲਿਨਡ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਭਾਰਤੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਆਰਮੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਡਿਸਪਲਿਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਦੋ ਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਰਜ ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੈਟੀਸਫੈਕਟਰੀ
ਗ੍ਰੰਥਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਕੁਝ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਵੱਲ ਵੀ ਝਲਕੀ ਆਪਣਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਲਿਆਉਂਗੇ ਸੋ ਆਓ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਅੱਗੇ ਕੁਝ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ ਵੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਵੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ so you know we're talking about different kinds of artifacts and here we've actually got some very decorated ceremonial dress here. Tell us about this and how this is linked with the Sikhs at the time.
Okay. So these aren't actually ceremonials. They were actually worn in the battles themselves, actually. So this particular one, this officer's shell jacket, was used by the 53rd Regiment on the left-hand side. And the one on the right, we think it belonged to a Sikh chief's son, for instance. Yeah. Because of the embroidery.
It's quite small, isn't it?
It's very small. So as a result of that, we don't think it was an adult one. We think it's a child's one, but someone of major importance. And luckily for us, this one is actually kept in a Mercian regiment in Worcester. We think it's only one of probably a couple which are probably around even now, worldwide, basically.
But if you look at the embroidery, it appears quite secular. There doesn't seem to be any lettering or words. So was this part of a European influence as well that was creeping in?
Absolutely, because when we talked about earlier on with the generals like Allard and Ventura, what they did was, as long as bringing their kind of military strategy, they also brought in their kind of customs as well. Now, we talked about the Sikh flag earlier on.
Because the Nihangs by now are really kind of quite marginalised, aren't they?
They're marginalised in the sense that they're not part of the main forge, but in the actual Anglo Sikh Wars, what they were doing was they were actually considered to be the snipers. They were actually considered to be the one-to-one combatants, so to speak. So, but in terms of their numbers, they were less compared to, say, some of the other forces.
I think that's important, because ਆਪਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਿਹੰਗਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਸਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਿਹੰਗ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਉਹ ਗੁਰਿਲਾ ਵਾਰਫੇਅਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਟੈਕਨੀਕ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਪੋਸਟ ਪੀਰੀਅਡ ਤੋਂ ਉਦੋਂ ਪੰਜਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਥੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਨਿਹੰਗਾਂ ਦੇ ਘੋੜਸਵਾਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ and they used to blend into the local community as well because survival ਤਾਂ ਇਦਾਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਸੀਗੀ when you're under this kind of imperial rule. So the Nihang warfare in some senses was suitable for the terrain and for the kind of needs at the time. To expect the Nihangs to get dressed in Nihang warfare and fight modern-day battles would really to be misunderstanding their own historical traditions.
Absolutely, because you wouldn't have a force of 30,000 under Ranjit Singh, because Ranjit Singh had actually kind of made the army totally different. Yeah. But Akali Phula Singh had actually reorganized the Nihang Singhs. But when we get to the Battle of Sabrama, many of the Nihang Singhs are decimated. And we talk about Akali Hanuman Singh, who after the Battle of Sabrama leaves Punjab, doesn't leave Punjab, crosses the Sutlej, gets to Patiala. The Patiala Rajas kill another couple of thousand.
Quite a lot of Nihangs were actually killed on their way to Patiala, weren't they?
That's correct. It was at Patiala that the Patiala Rajas fired their cannons on Akali Hanuman Singh and his Nihangs. So many thousands were died at that particular point, and then he gets to Sohana in Chandigarh, and Otte o Shaheed baniya siga after that particular battle.
So ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਕੁਝ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਕਿਰਪਾਨਾਂ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ ਚੱਕਰ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਹੱਥ ਲਿਖਤ ਪੋਥੀ ਵੀ ਹੈ ਥੋੜਾ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਥੋੜਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਦੱਸੋ ਜੀ
ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਕ ਸ਼ਾਸਤਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਬੈਟਲਫੀਲਡ ਤੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਲੱਭੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਫਰੋਮ ਦ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ ਰੈਜੀਮੈਂਟਲ ਮਿਊਜ਼ੀਅਮਸ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤਲਵਾਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਦਿਸਦੀ ਆ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਫਰੋਮ ਨੋਟਿੰਗਹਮ ਦੋ ਹੋਰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ they were actually taken from Shropshire Regimental Museum. So ਆਡਾ ਡਿਸਪਲੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਪੋਥੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ the manuscript ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਇਹ Battle of Feroz Shah ਤੋਂ ਇਹ manuscript ਆਉਂਦਾ ਆ it was actually found on the actual battlefield as well.
ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਾਠੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹਿਲਟ ਵੱਲ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਲਿਆਈਏ ਕੈਮਰਾ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਬਾਣੀ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਲਿਖੀ ਗਈ
it's not Bani, it's an actual explanation of how the sword was taken. So basically ਇੱਕ ਸਿੱਖ ਨਾਲੇ ਗੋਰਾ fighting ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਦੋਏ fighting ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਦੋਏ ਮਰ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਦਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੋਰੇ ਨੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹ ਸੋਡ ਲੈ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਫਿਰ ਮਗਰੋਂ ਇਹਨੇ ਸਟੋਰੀ ਇਹਨੇ
ਸਾਖੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਖੀ ਲਿਖੀ ਗਈ ਸੋ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਮਾਲ ਪਰ ਕੁਝ ਕੁ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ ਤੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਜਪਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ ਜਾਪ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਬਾਣੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਇਹ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਉਹ ਵੈਰੀ ਗੁੱਡ ਸੀਗੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਰੈਕੋਰਡ ਕੀਪ ਕਰਨੇ ਨੂੰ ਵੈਰੀ ਗੁੱਡ ਸੀਗੇ ਕੈਟਲੌਗ ਕਰਨੇ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਪਈਆਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਆ ਆਪਾਂ
ਹੁਣ ਇੱਧਰ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਯੂਰਪੀਅਨ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਮੈਡਲਸ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਨਕਸ਼ਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ ਇੱਕ ਕਮਾਲ ਦੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਕਸ਼ੇ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰੋ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਇਹ ਨਕਸ਼ਾ ਹੈਗਾ
ਜੀ ਇਹ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬੈਟਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਬੈਟਲ ਸਦੂਲਪੁਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਇਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਰਾਮਨਗਰ ਸੈਕੰਡ ਐਂਗਲੋ ਸਿੱਖ ਵਾਰ ਤੇ ਹੋਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹ ਸਮੂਲ ਸਕਰਮਿਸ਼ ਸੀਗਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਹ ਮੇਜਰ ਬੈਟਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਦਾਂ ਇਹ ਸਕਰਮਿਸ਼ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹ hand drawn
original ਹੈਗਾ ਹੈ
original hand drawn ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੈਗਾ ਸਦੂਲਪੁਰ ਦਾ so it's very very rare so to speak as well ਜਿਹੜੇ shastras are from the Gore on the Gore side again if you can see they're very different to the Sikh talwars for instance so as a result of that like as I was saying earlier on the Sikhs had a kind of advantage when it came to their weapons so to speak as well we also see and it's really really important ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਾਡੀਆਂ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ the Gore used to take their Bibles into battle as well. Yeah. So this Bible from the Battle of Jallianwala was picked up in the actual battle as well. So it just shows you the different kind of range of kind of exhibits available.
Well, ਆਪਾਂ ਜੇ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪੋਸਟਰ ਆ ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਦਿਖਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਬੈਟਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਮੈਦਾਨੇ ਜੰਗ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੂੰ ਨਾਲ ਲਿਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸੀਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੁਰੂ ਹਰਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਜੀ ਪਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਨਾਲ ਰੱਖਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਜਿਆਦੀ ਬਾਣੀ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਘੱਟ ਬਾਣੀ ਹੋਵੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਪਰੰਪਰਾ ਸੀਗੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਪੋਥੀ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਫਰੋਸ਼ਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬੈਟਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਲੱਭੀ ਗਈ ਇਹ ਜੋ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦੀ ਹੱਥ ਲਿਖਤ ਇਹ ਮੈਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੱਸਾਂ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਇੱਕ 52nd ਬੰਗਾਲ ਨੇਟਿਵ ਇਨਫੈਂਟਰੀ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਗੁਜਰਾਤ ਦੀ ਬੈਟਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 21 ਫਰਵਰੀ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਆਫੀਸਰ ਨੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਸੀ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ that was their booty wasn't it in war they would take whatever they could
ਜੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੋਈ ਚੀਜ਼ ਬੈਟਲਫੀਲਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਡਿੱਗੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਉਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਚੱਕ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਨਾਲੇ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਈਆਂ ਆ all different museums British Museum British Library ਸਾਰਾ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਸੀਗਾ we know that ਰਾਣੀ ਜਿੰਦਨ ਕੋਲ ਗੁਟਕਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਪਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਲਾਇਬ੍ਰੇਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ
ਸੋ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਐਗਜ਼ੀਬਿਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਆਖਰ ਤੱਕ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਮਾਨ ਜਦੋਂ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਨੇ ਐਨੈਕਸ ਕੀਤਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਚੱਕ ਕੇ ਲੈ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਤੋਸ਼ੇਖਾਨੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਪਰ ਇੰਡੀਵਿਜੂਅਲ ਸੋਲਜਰਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਜੋ ਆਰਟੀਫੈਕਟਸ ਹੋਣਗੀਆਂ ਸ਼ਸਤਰ ਪੋਥੀਆਂ ਔਰ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਇਹ ਸਮਾਨ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਅਮੀਰ ਘਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਝ ਗਵਾਚ ਗਿਆ ਕੋਈ ਉਹਦਾ ਲੋਫਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਿਆ ਆ ਕੁਝ ਮਾਰਕੀਟਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਿਕਦਾ but there's a lot more work to be done there's probably if you it's a difficult question but if we said how much have we actually uncovered so far what would you say would it be 5% 10% 50% where would you put the figure
Well, before we give you a figure, what we've been doing as a Sikh Museum Initiative is trying to catalogue and locate all these relics across the UK. Now, if I gave you a figure, I think it'd be very difficult to answer that. The reason I say that is because every day, every week, appa koi nama relic koi labadaya. The private collection we can't account for. It could be hundreds and thousands of items which are in private collections because the private individual does not let on as to what they have. But what we're saying is, if you showcase and tell us what we have, maybe we can create 3D technology out of these exhibits and we can try and create a better
and
way
you know and we have now we've got the Derby Museum we've got the online museum that Gurinder's created and other exhibitions and I think we do need to now begin to think about maybe creating a national Sikh museum in the UK in a prominent position where we can bring those private collections because we're not going to be able to buy them in auction they're too expensive and they're not going to give them up but if we can create a space then we could actually make this a centerpiece and to recover some of our history as well.
And the interesting thing about our exhibition is that the museums that we've been working with, they're very, very open to lend these materials to us because we came across and explained, we were explaining our itas to them as well. So therefore, having a national museum would be very, very useful. Funding is a big issue, but what the Sikh Museum Initiative is doing is we're already doing the groundwork because we're already connected with museums, already trying to connect with private collectors as well. So if you do have any Sikh ityas, please do contact the Sikh Museum at www.sikhmuseum.org.uk. Contact us, talk to us, and we would like to get to know about more items so we can actually bring these out to the public.
So this last exhibit that we've got here is again something unique, Gurinder. Just before we do actually show the exhibit, just tell us a bit about, very briefly, what is this all about?
Okay. So again, we talked about the 3D modelling in terms of what the Sikh Museum Initiative is doing, but also what we're doing is we're actually investing and looking at what we call augmented reality in a sense. Okay, so what that means is you can actually now start seeing objects virtually in the palm of your hand, really. So we're using technology to bring the artifacts to life, basically. So if we cannot have access to these materials, if we cannot have the originals, we can recreate them, but then we can actually see them in the palm of our hands, basically.
So we will now switch the lights off and actually show you this. So we'll hit the lights and show you.
So what we see here is we actually see a shield in front of us, which we can actually kind of maneuver, look at in the palm of our hands. And that is exactly what we're trying to achieve by actually modeling these objects. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a shield. We have a depiction of a brown best gun as well. So just kind of, you can actually make children actually excited to see exhibits as well. We also have what we showed earlier on was the Charena of Guru Gobind Singh. So now you can actually place it here.
Almost like walk into it.
You can also see what size it was and how it would look like as it was worn by the Guru Ji as well. So in terms of our final piece here, we actually have a Sikh sword as well. So again, we can actually see the size and we can see what it looks like. What it does do, these exhibits, is it actually helps individuals learn more about their ityas and more about their history through this new technology.
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਜੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਟੈਕਨੋਲੋਜੀ ਡਿਵੈਲਪ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਹੈ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਕਿਲੇ ਹੋਏ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਛੋਟੀਆਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ and you can walk through them. This is the amazing thing. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਹੱਥ 'ਚ ਫੜਿਆ. That's the key thing, isn't it?
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਇਹੀ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਟਰਾਈ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ. ਆਪਾਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਦੂਰ ਨਾ ਰਹੇ. ਆਪਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਸਾਡਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੇੜੇ ਲਿਆਈਏ. ਆਪਾਂ ਨੇੜੇ ਲਿਆ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਟੈਕਨੋਲੋਜੀ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰਕੇ. ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਫਰਸਟ ਲੈਵਲ ਆ ਟੈਕਨੋਲੋਜੀ ਯੂਜ਼ ਕਰਨੇ ਨੂੰ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਨਵੈਸਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਆ ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦਿਖਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ এনवायरमेंट्स ਵਿੱਚ 3D ਵਰਕ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ.
Well, sadly, we've run out of time. That's the end of the exhibition. But just some final thoughts, concluding comments, but also, you know, what next?
Well, I think the whole Sikh Museum Initiative team has done really well in terms of actually collating all these things together. But what we are going to be doing is we're going to take this out on the road as well. So we're going to have a travelling exhibition. So we're going to go and visit various other places. But also, we want to tap into the new technologies as well to make sure that we can actually ensure that we keep and preserve our Sikhi and our future in terms of technology.
Absolutely, preserve our future. This is the key thing. And really, no one person can do that. ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਹਾਲਤ ਸੀ ਅੱਜ ਕੋਈ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਚੱਕ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ. ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸ਼ਾਬਾਸ਼ੀ ਦੇਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ. But I think even Gurinder would prefer hundreds of other young people and not so young people to come out and become kind of interested in you know, developing their own work and getting artifacts and telling that story. So this is really what we want to do, is we want to spark a whole revolution among Sikhs, that this kind of work is just as important as doing your Khandpads and your Kirtan Darbads and everything else. It all fits as a part of a, you know, a bigger kind of whole, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, because what it means is that our ityas, coming from the Gurus, means that everything that we have is ityasic, has importance, has a purpose. We've looked at the shields and the swords. They meant something for our Sikhs, and it should mean something to them now. So therefore it's important to get in contact with us at sikhmuseum.org.uk and then try and work with us, you know, so we can try and create this kind of ityasic picture of where things are located.
So ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਇਹ ਐਕਸੀਬਿਸ਼ਨ ਔਰ ਜੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਵਿਚਾਰਦੇ ਵਧੀਆ ਲੱਗੇ ਹੋਗੇ. ਅਕਾਲ ਚੈਨਲ ਦਾ ਮਿਸ਼ਨ ਹੀ ਇਹ ਆ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨੂੰ ਪ੍ਰਫੁੱਲਤ ਕਰਨਾ, ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਊਚਰ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਦੀ ਸੰਭਾਲਣੀ ਆ. ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਸਵੀਕਾਰ ਕਰੋਗੇ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਜੋ ਐਕਸੀਬਿਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਇੱਕ ਨਵੀਂ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ, ਇੱਕ ਕਮਾਲ ਦੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਮ ਨੂੰ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ. ਸੋ ਗੁਰਿੰਦਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਫਤਿਹ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.
बोले